Hare Krishna. I am Radhika Pyari Devidasi, and this is the continuation of the Mahabharat series retold by Krishna Dharma Prabhu. Part 2, Chapter 22 The Narayana Weapon. As the Kauravas fled, the Pandavas came together to discuss their next move. Arjuna was furious with Drishtadyumna. He smoldered as he spoke to Yudhishthira. Drupad's son has committed a barbaric act. You too, O king, are stained by sin. The preceptor trusted you to speak truth, but you deceived him by uttering a lie carved as truth. You will bear the shame of this act forever, like that borne by Rama for killing Vali. Alas, I too am guilty in that I stood by and suffered my teacher to be cheated and killed by his own disciples. Longing for sovereignty, we have killed our own Guru by foul means. I think it better for me to die than to live on after being a party to such sin. Arjuna lamented at length, but no one replied. Krishna looked at him with compassion. Arjuna's love for Drona was legendary. Unmannered by grief, he fell to his knees and wept. Seeing his younger brother in the grip of sorrow, Bhima reproached him. It is strange indeed that today you preach morality like a rishi living in the woods. Have you forgotten why we entered this war in the first place? Impelled by Kshatriya duty, we have come to punish Duryodhana and his followers. Do you not recall how they abused the sinless Draupadi in our preceptor's presence? Have you forgotten how we were exiled to the forest even as Drona stood by and watched? For years we kept alive the flame of animosity so that we could mete out the proper consequences to our foes. Now that we are doing so, you lament in the name of virtue? If Drona's killing lacked virtue, then why did you swear you would hurl your blazing weapons upon the Kauravas, headed by Drona himself? Bhima's voice rose in anger. Arjuna looked at him in silence. He was never offended by his older brother's words. Controlling his emotions with difficulty, he listened as Bhima went on. Dear brother, you are rending our hearts with your piteous lamentations and reprovals. At a time when praise is in order, you are issuing stern judgments. Surely it is fortunate for our enemies that you are now bent upon forbearance. For myself, however, I see Drona's death as fitting and just. Now we should waste no time in crushing the remaining Kauravas, headed as they will be by the now vengeful Ashwathama. Arjuna clenched his teeth and said nothing. Drishtadyumna stood nearby, unrepentant. Arjuna glanced at him with reddened eyes, and the Panchala prince addressed him in conciliatory tones. O Bibhatsu, I do not feel I have committed any sin. Although a Brahmin, Drona transgressed the duties of his order and thus became punishable by all virtuous kings. By using his Brahma power, he slew countless ordinary soldiers with celestial weapons. In this way, he acted deceitfully, and as a result, has himself been slain by deceit. No other course was possible. You should not censure me for killing him. It was for that purpose that I took my birth from fire. I have slain the ruthless warrior by whatever means I could. Otherwise, he could have destroyed us all. Bhima made sounds of approval as Drishtadyumna continued. By killing Drona, I am freed from my debt to my father and my kinsmen. It would have been sinful of me to have spared him. O Partha, you felled your aged grandsire. If that was not sinful, then why is my act condemned? Drona was a sinful wretch, given to serving sinful men. You should not censure me, Arjuna. But since you do, I forgive you from the love I bear for you and because you are Draupadi's husband. Be peaceful. Yudhishthira acted rightly and so did I. Between us we have slain one whose business was injuring his own disciples. Now fight and victory will soon be yours. Arjuna fumed as Drishtadyumna insulted his teacher. But seeing both Yudhishthira and Krishna remaining silent, he controlled himself. He only glanced at Drishtadyumna, muttering, Fie, fie, under his breath. Satyaki, who had been seated on his chariot near Arjuna, suddenly leapt to his feet. Unable to tolerate Drishtadyumna's words, he exclaimed, "Is there no one who will dispatch this sinful, low, and cursed wretch? O mean-minded one, how do you dare utter such words? It is a wonder that your head did not shatter into fragments when you were on the point of slaying your preceptor. You deserve the condemnation of all pious men. Having obtained you the disgrace of their race, 7 generations before and 7 after, you have sunk into hell, deprived of their glory. You accuse Arjuna of killing Bhishma, but was it not your own wicked brother Shikhandi who caused his death? Surely there are no men more sinful than the Panchalas." Satyaki raised his mace as he continued to censure Drishtadyumna. "If you again speak such words, I will knock off your head with my mace. Simply by looking at you, O killer of a Brahmin, one has to look at the sun to purify himself. If you have any prowess, then stand before me with your weapons raised. I cannot stand to hear you abuse both my teacher and my teacher's teacher." Drishtadyumna laughed. "O son of Madhu's race, I forgive you for these words, although you are the most sinful of men. Really, no one should show forgiveness towards someone as wicked as you, because forgiveness only leads people like you to think I have no power. Have you forgotten how you, one who loves justice, slew Bhurishrava even after he had defeated you and desisted from the fight? Hold your tongue. You should not say anything more to me. If you insist on uttering such words, I will dispatch you to death's abode." Drishtadyumna also reminded Satyaki of all the deceitful acts committed by the Kauravas. Even on the battlefield, it had been Drona who had arranged for Abhimanyu to be slain by unfair means. In war, it is inevitable that the rules are sometimes broken. Still, righteousness ultimately decides the victory. Therefore, fight on against the Kauravas. O Vrishni hero, there is no doubt that they should be vanquished and slain by enemies at our disposal." Satyaki trembled with fury. His eyes bloodshot. He seized his mace and leapt down from his chariot. He rushed at Drishtadyumna. "I will waste no more words on you. You will now be crushed by my mace." At a signal from Krsna, Bhima jumped from his chariot and stood between the two maddened warriors. He grabbed hold of Satyaki, who dragged him a few steps, roaring in fury. Sahadev also sprang from his chariot and said, "O foremost of men, we have no better friends than you two. Your races are as dear to us as our own. You are dear friends to each other. Remember the duties of friends towards friends and exercise forgiveness. This is no time to quarrel among ourselves." Drishtadyumna laughed. "Bhima, release Sini's grandson. Let him encounter me like the wind encounters the mountains. I will soon quell his desire for battle. Then I will destroy the remaining Kauravas. Or Arjuna can perform this feat. Let me cut off this one's head with my arrows. He takes me to be Bhurishrava with his arm locked off. Leave him, either I will slay him or he will slay me." Satyaki swelled in Bhima's arms and bellowed. He struggled to break free, but Bhima held him fast. Like the moon spreading its cooling rays at night, Krsna then spoke consoling words to the two antagonists. Yudhishthira also pacified them, and he and Krsna managed at last to allay their anger. As they both calmed down and remounted their chariots, the Pandavas suddenly heard the sound of joyous roaring from the Kauravas. They looked at each other in surprise. How were their enemies so enthused? After Drona's death, the entire army had broken and fled. Hearing the approaching sound, Arjuna smiled and said, "Doubtlessly, Ashwathama has rallied our foes. He who upon his birth neighed like the celestial horse Uchishrava, and who has arms like the elephant trunks and a face like a tiger, will soon come upon us in a rage. He will not tolerate his father's heinous killing. Drishtadyumna now faces great danger. Let us prepare ourselves for the fight." The Pandavas saw the billowing clouds of dust rising as the Kauravas charged them once again. Forgetting their own disagreements, the warriors quickly moved into position, ready to receive the attack. They could see Ashwathama's golden standard with its lion tail emblem waving at the head of the advancing Kaurava forces. Bhima and the twins deployed a large contingent of chariot fighters to surround and attack him before he reached Drishtadyumna. As the Kauravas raced back to the battle, intent on avenging Drona's death, the sun fell towards the west. Ashwathama, having sworn to Duryodhana that he would annihilate both Drishtadyumna and the Panchala army, thought of the Narayan weapon. Coming to within a half mile of the Pandavas, he placed the celestial arrow on his bow and recited a sacred incantations to invoke the missile. A deep roar came from the sky as Drona's son summoned the weapon. Tens of thousands of fiery arrows appeared on the battlefield and flew towards the Pandava army like sun rays. Countless red-hot iron balls fell from the sky like lustrous meteors. Razor-edged discuses, axes, flaming spears, and spiked maces filled the air. The Kauravas could not perceive their foes as the hail of missiles fell towards them. The Pandavas became anxious. It seemed that the blazing missiles were springing into existence on every part of the battlefield. Wherever their warriors were stationed, a shower of weapons fell from the sky. The Pandava army was enveloped in a mass of arrows and darts. The troops fell by the thousands, cut to pieces by the relentless assault. The Pandava heroes tried to resist the attack. But the harder they tried, the worse it became. The more it was resisted, the more force the Narayan Astra seemed to have. Seeing his army being scorched, Yudhishthira shouted the order to retreat. His panic-stricken voice rose above the din of the falling missiles, striking his soldiers' armor and shields. Flee for your lives, do not look back. This weapon cannot be repelled. Surely this is the result of killing our sinless preceptors. I and my brothers will enter blazing fire. O warriors, go back to your homes. Krishna told Yudhishthira to remain calm. He knew how to resist the weapon. Standing on Arjuna's chariot, he called, "All you Kshatriyas, quickly throw aside your weapons and come down from your chariots and elephants. Lie flat on the ground without weapons. Do not attempt to fight this weapon, for that will only increase its power. If you think of contending with the weapon, you will be slain." Hearing Krishna's words, the warriors cast aside their weapons and threw themselves to the ground. The missiles generated by the Narayan weapon passed harmlessly over their heads. Bhima saw the soldiers dropping their weapons and he shouted, "No one should lay aside his arms. Do not fear this weapon hurled by Ashwathama. I will personally check its power with my swift flying arrows. Striking Drona's son with countless shafts, I will send him along the path taken by his father. O Arjuna, how can you lay aside the Gandiva and lose your fame and glory? Stand and fight. I will bear the brunt of this weapon on my broad chest. Today you will all behold my prowess." Arjuna called back, "Bhima, my vow is that I will not use the Gandiva against Brahmins, cows, and any weapon of the holy Lord Narayan. Against all these, will I lay it aside? You too should stand down, O hero. This all-devouring weapon cannot be checked by the force of arms." Bhima paid no heed to Arjuna and rushed at the Kauravas. Oblivious to the thick shower of missiles filling the air, he stood on his chariot releasing fierce steel arrows at Ashwathama. Drona's son smiled and resisted Bhima's attack, cutting down all his shafts as they came towards him. As all the Pandavas' warriors lay down on the field, the Narayanastra concentrated its full force on Bhima. He became completely shrouded by blazing missiles. Appearing like a sacrificial fire suddenly sprung up on the field. No one could even look at him. So brilliant was his glowing effulgence beneath the attack of the Narayan Astra. Seeing his brother's flight, Arjuna invoked the Varuna weapon. The watery weapon covered Bhima, affording him protection from the ever-increasing power of the Narayan weapon. But Arjuna knew it would not be long before his impetuous brother was overpowered. Krishna suddenly jumped down from his chariot and ran towards Bhima, telling Arjuna to come with him. The two heroes plunged fearlessly into the mass of fire surrounding Bhima. They seized hold of him and dragged him on his chariot. Bhima roared in anger as Arjuna tore his weapons from his grasp. In an urgent voice, Krishna said, "O son of Pandu, what do you think you are doing? If it were possible to check this weapon, we would all be fighting. Be still and do not act so foolishly." Reluctantly, Bhima assented to Krishna's instructions. He lay still with his weapons put aside. The Narayan Astra receded. Its numerous missiles went into the sky and soon vanished. When the battlefield was again clear of the missiles, the Pandavas got to their feet and took up their weapons. Saved from a grave danger by Krishna's advice, they mounted their chariots and horses and roared out their battle cries. Duryodhana was annoyed to see that his foes had escaped. He approached Ashwathama and said, "Quickly, send that weapon again, for the Pandavas have rallied and will attack with all their power." Ashwathama shook his head. The Narayan weapon can be used only once by any man. If invoked again, it will slay the person using it. Krishna knew the secret of countering this weapon, and it has thus been baffled. Duryodhana cursed. Then use whatever weapons you possess. Your power is equal to that of Mahadev himself. O son of Drona, slay these murderers of their preceptor without delay. Ashwathama rushed into the battle, seeking out Drishtadyumna. He assailed him with thousands of barbed arrows. Enraged, he bore down on his adversary with frightening force. He slew his charioteer and 4 horses and smashed his chariot. Drishtadyumna came down to the ground and warded off Ashwathama's attack with his sword and shield. Satyaki was near at hand and saw Drishtadyumna's predicament. Remembering his duty as a Kshatriya, he came quickly to his comrade's assistance. He enveloped Ashwathama in a network of arrows which killed his heroes and charioteer. Drona's son then leapt from his chariot, still afflicted by Satyaki's shouts. Kripa came to his aid and took him onto his own chariot. Kripa and Karna then attacked Satyaki and Drishtadyumna. As many other Pandavas and Kauravas, heroes rushed into the fray. Mounting a fresh chariot, Ashwathama came again towards Drishtadyumna. Once again Satyaki came before him, and Ashwathama called out to the Vrishni warrior, "O grandson of Sini, I know the partiality you bear for this killer of his own teacher, but you shall not save him today. I swear by my life that I will slay all the Panchalas headed by this sinful wretch. You too shall fall a victim to my arrows if you try to protect him, as will all the Pandavas and their armies. I will not be stopped." Ashwathama pierced Satyaki with a volley of barbed arrows. As Satyaki reeled, Ashwathama took up a long shaft that glowed with a brilliant effulgence. In an instant, he released it with all his power. It penetrated Satyaki's armor and dug deeply into his shoulders. Stunned, the Vrishni fighter squatted on the terrace of his chariot, and the charioteer took him away from the battle to recover. Ashwathama turned his attention to Drishtadyumna, launching a vicious attack on the Panchala prince. Releasing his mantra-inspired shafts with all his power, he pierced every part of his body. Drishtadyumna was overpowered by the sheer ferocity of Ashwathama's attack, and he leaned on his standard pole for support. A number of Pandava heroes rushed to his rescue. Headed by Bhima and Arjuna, they surrounded Ashwathama, shooting arrows at him from all sides. Ashwathama countered their arrows with astounding speed and skill. He struck all of his assailants with his own shafts and roared out his dreadful war cry. Not caring for his own life, Ashwathama fought in a frenzy. The thought of his father's death drove him as he forced back his attackers. No one had ever seen him fight so fiercely. While holding the principal Pandava warriors in check, he simultaneously slew a large number of Panchala soldiers with his celestial weapons. Kings and princes of various domains came against Drona's son, but they were all quickly slain. The Panchalas turned and fled as Ashwathama wrought an awful carnage among them. But he killed them even as they ran in fear. Their weapons cast aside, Arjuna shouted, "O son of Drona, stop killing ordinary soldiers. Here I am ready to destroy your pride. Exhibit the full limit of your prowess, manliness and knowledge, and also of your partiality for Dhritarashtra's son and hatred for us. Drishtadyumna and I will crush you. He has already slain your father and now stands ready to kill you as well." Ashwathama writhed at Arjuna's harsh words. Their old friendship from the days in Drona's school was obviously forgotten. Now they were fighting to the death. Glaring at the Pandava, Ashwathama thought of the Agneya weapon. He placed a golden shaft upon his bow, muttered the incantations with concentration, and then let it go with a cry. At once, a thick shower of arrows fell from the sky. A dense gloom enveloped the battlefield. The fiery meteors dropped down. Fierce winds blew in every direction, lashing the warriors with stones. The terrifying cries of Rakshasas and Visachas resounded from the darkness. The jackals howled from all sides. Afflicted by celestial weapon, the Pandava forces shrieked in fear and pain. They were struck by blazing arrows that came at them from all directions. Ashwathama's skill at the secret mystical sciences endowed the Agnya weapon with menacing power. Men, heroes, and elephants were slaughtered and burned to ashes as if caught in the final conflagration that burns the worlds. But Agni, remembering the incident at Khandava Prastha, had his fiery weapon pass harmlessly over Arjuna and Krishna. Seeing the fire god's irresistible energy summoned for the Pandavas' destruction, Arjuna composed his mind and thought of the Brahmastra. Invoking the most powerful of all weapons, he at once dissipated the dense darkness. As Brahma's weapons neutralized Agni's, the sky cleared and a cool breeze flew. Tens of thousands of warriors lay on the battlefield, their bodies burnt beyond recognition. Ashwathama was amazed to see his weapon checked and Arjuna emerging unscathed. How had he survived the Agnya weapon, which had killed tens of thousands of other warriors? Both Arjuna and Krishna had been right in the path of the weapon, but both were unharmed. Ashwathama felt hopeless. First the Narayan Astra and now the Agnya weapon. Both had been foiled by Arjuna and Krishna. How could he contend with such foes? They were invincible. Throwing down his bow in despair, Ashwathama jumped from his chariot and ran from the battlefield. He cried out, "Everything is illusion," and sped away from the fight, entering a copse of trees. His grief for his father overwhelmed him. He felt as if he would never be able to avenge him. Even his most powerful weapons were ineffectual against the Pandavas. What was the use of fighting them? As Ashwathama was running, he met Vyasadeva, who was approaching the battlefield. Drona's son stopped and bowed before the rishi. He asked him why his weapons were useless against Arjuna. Vyasadeva explained that Krishna was the supreme lord. He was Narayan or Vishnu indeed. The immortal Narayan was simply a part of Krishna. There was no living being anywhere who could overpower Krishna or anyone he protected. Even Shiva considered himself Krishna's servant. He too had once been bested by him in a fight. Hearing Vyasadeva's descriptions, Ashwathama thought better of Krishna. If Vyasadeva's words were true, then it was no surprise that his weapons had been baffled. As long as Arjuna had Krishna on his chariot, there would be little point in further encounters with him. Dispirited and sorrowful, Ashwathama realized that the all-powerful destiny was ultimately in control. In the face of fate, man could do nothing except execute his duty and leave the results to destiny. From Vyasadeva's words, it seemed as though the Kauravas would be defeated. But who could know ahead of time what destiny would finally decree? Bowing again to the sage, Ashwathama turned back towards the battlefield. It was still his duty to fight for Duryodhana, and especially to honor his slain father. His enemies had to be punished. He could not leave the battle now. As Ashwathama returned, the sun was setting. The two armies retreated, exhausted after fighting for almost 2 days and a night. Despondent at Drona's death, the Kauravas returned sorrowfully to their camp, while the Pandavas returned to the sound of trumpets, drums, and conch shells. When they reached their encampment, the Pandavas saw that Vyasadeva had arrived. Arjuna got down from his chariot and went over to the sage. Bowing and touching his feet, he said, "O all opulent one, I have seen something today which inspired me with great wonder. As I released arrows towards my foes, I saw before me a male being shining like fire. He held a blazing trident, and whichever way he turned, my enemies were burned and destroyed. Although he never hurled his trident nor any other weapon, his energy alone seemed to annihilate my foes. Who is this personality, O great sage?" Placing his hand on Arjuna's head, who still knelt before him, Vyasadeva replied, "O son of Kunti, You have seen Shankara, the great destroyer of the worlds. Out of his love and respect for Krishna, he walks before your chariot, scorching your enemies with his irresistible energy. Even the powerful universal protectors could not stand before him. Go forth and fight with confidence. On the Ranjaya, defeat is not for one who has Janardana by his side. After assuring the Pandavas that the war would soon be over, Vyasdev left. Worn out from the fight, the warriors went straight to their tents to rest for the night. Thus ends the 22nd chapter of the Mahabharat series, the Narayan weapon. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.